Hello everyone, welcome to this video which covers chapters 21, 22, 23, 24 and the continuation at the end of the novel by Walton. We left off in the last video with chapter 20 where Victor Frankenstein had washed up on the shores of Ireland and he'd been kind of accosted by a group of people to be taken before Mr. Kerwin, who's a magistrate, accused of the murder of a body that's washed up on the shore as well. And chapter 21, obviously Victor's kind of introduced here. He's there's a kind of a trial here, a bit of a kangaroo court really, where he's kind of thrown in front of people who say they've seen this body. And so there's a kind of a trial here, and then basically Victor then sees the body of the person who's been murdered, and it is Henry Clerval. And how can I describe my sensations on beholding it as well? He's then kind of taken into custody. The human frame could no longer support the agonies I endured, and I was carried out of the room in strong convulsions. So he's in prison, but he's had a nervous fit as well, a similar sort of thing that's happened after the creation of the creature. We talk about Frankenstein being a Gothic novel sometimes, well, kind of the Gothic genre, and Shelley uses the Gothic genre, and sometimes within that Gothic genre you have disjointed narratives as one of the features of that. And as part of that, these fits that Victor has for 2 months here, that basically to kind of take him out of the picture, kind of are used to reflect his weakness really, his kind of physical weakness, I suppose, in contrast to the creature. And it kind of, as we go through the next couple of chapters, you see the creature as being physically strong and Victor's mental and physical state completely deteriorating here. He has a fit here, and in the point of his ravings, I call myself the murderer of William, of Justine and of Clerval. So he's there in prison saying that he's murdered all these people on trial of the murder of Clerval. So he's basically confessing to this crime here. But he's only doing that because he's having a fit. If we have a high temperature, obviously sometimes we think things, our brains kind of struggle to necessarily cope with the temperature rise. And Victor's doing the same sort of thing. He doesn't really mean this. He's just having a nightmare here. But he is the murderer of them because it's his fault they are dead. There's a kind of a eulogy here where Shelley kind of says, death snatches away many blooming children, the only hopes of their doting parents. How many brides and youthful lovers have been one day in the bloom of health and hope and the next to pray for worms in the decay of the tomb? This is Victor's narrative, but it could as well be Shelley's. Shelley's mother died very, very quickly after her birth. And of course Shelley's relationship with her father was quite difficult, leading to her almost being kind of cast aside by her father, and her relationship with Percy Shelley was quite difficult as well. So the kind of death is a metaphor in this case for the relationship Shelley herself has with her own parents as well. She could be seen to be the blooming child here as well, in the same way that William has been murdered too. But I was doomed to live, and that verb doomed there, life is no longer a joy to Victor, or indeed to anyone in the novel, as a result of Victor's actions here as well. So chapter 1 carries on with Victor. He gets to know a lady who looks after him in the prison. He's kind of talking here, and the magistrate enters. It's quite interesting. I fear that this place is very shocking to you. Can I do anything to make you more comfortable? We talk about Frankenstein sometimes being a revolutionary novel here. The magistrate is going into prison to make sure that someone accused of murder, probably one of the most serious crimes you can commit, is okay in prison. It's completely ridiculous. But because Kerwin recognises that Frankenstein is of a similar social class to him, he is more than willing to make him, or even a higher social class, make him as comfortable as possible in prison here. And Kerwin talks him through kind of the case and what he kind of thinks about this as well. And he says that someone's here to visit him. He's kind of read the letters from Geneva, and Frankenstein's father, Alphonse, arrives to kind of make sure he's okay. And miraculously, on page 139, my father was enraptured on finding me freed from the vexations of a criminal charge. So basically, Victor has been completely cleared of the murder of Clerval. Now, I know he's not done it. We know it's the creature who's done it, but this shows corruption in society at the time, because you've got Kerwin and the Frankenstein. So you've got high class characters in society basically just freeing Victor there's enough evidence to convict Victor here as well. I know he hasn't done it, but he is guilty by, through the creation of the creature, and he is the one essentially responsible for Clerval's death. So he is guilty, but he's freed from this criminal charge because of the corruption, because of the relationship between the upper class characters here. Oh, of course you didn't do it as well. And the other thing is that he's freed without ever having to mention the real reasons behind Clerval's death as well. So Victor kind of leaves Ireland eventually, and they go through Paris and go back home to Geneva, and of course they've got the wedding to kind of get ready for. Victor's also concerned with his family in chapter 22. And so Victor kind of talks here to his father. He basically confesses on page 142 at the bottom about William, Justine and Henry. Victor's father dismisses him as mad here, kind of delusional here. He talks about deranged, he's not thinking clearly. But interestingly, Victor kind of stops doing this deliberately. So he's clearly not deranged at all. I know in popular culture he's often presented as the mad scientist, Victor Frankenstein. But he's not, because my impatient thirst for sympathy and was silent when I would have given the world to have confided the fatal secret. First of all, why is he not then confiding the fatal secret? Why is he not telling his father, show him the notebook, talk him through the process, take him to Ingolstadt? But he doesn't do any of these things. He's silent. And also, Elizabeth, who he's going to get married to in a couple of pages' time, is the person he should be confiding the fatal secret to. And it's a fatal secret because it's led to the deaths of other people, and it eventually leads to Elizabeth's, Victor's, and potentially the creature's death as we go through as well here. Elizabeth writes a letter to Victor basically saying, do you still love me? I know you've been away for a while, come on, what's going on? Victor's reminded of I will be with you on your wedding night, the threat, and then he kind of talks here about, what's going to happen to Elizabeth, what's going to happen to me, she didn't want to see me die. And then they arrange to be married as well, here as well. And then Victor and Elizabeth talk, they kind of arrange to be married, and Victor kind of says here, great God, if for one instant I had thought what might be the hellish intention of my fiendish adversary. Victor's talking here, he's reflecting backwards in his narrative. So he's narrating the story to Clerval on the boat, but he is kind of reflecting back in time to this. If for one instant I had thought and he talks about, but as if possessed of magic powers, the monster had blinded me to his real intentions. It's hard to feel any empathy for Victor, really, because the creature doesn't have magic powers. The creature hasn't blinded. Victor blames the creature. The monster had blinded me to his real intentions. But the creature's done nothing here. Victor has been self-blinded. He's been self-delusional. If for one instant I had thought what might be the hellish intention of my fiendish adversary, and that if for one instant I had thought quite accurately sums up Victor's character, because he's quite rash and impulsive. He creates the creature without a single thought for what might happen. We have the phrase created a monster. He has created the monster, and the monster is now wreaking revenge because of his actions as well. He doesn't think, and that is his kind of one of his character flaws there as well. So it's quite interesting. The magic powers, the creature has no magic powers. He's made of mortal parts. It's Victor who blinds himself here as well, and we don't feel any empathy for him as a result. They have the wedding, the ceremony was performed, and they go off on a little kind of honeymoon on chapter 23, and they kind of land in the hotel they're staying. Suddenly a heavy storm of rain descended, some lovely pathetic fallacy there as well. And they're about to get to their wedding night, and I passed an hour in the state of mind when suddenly I reflected how fearful a combat which I momentarily expected would be to my wife, and I earnestly entreated her to retire. Still not told her what's going on. What is it that agitates you? He had the golden chance to tell her what's going on. He should perhaps have told her, in the interest of having a good relationship before this, but they're married now. But he doesn't tell her, and then all of a sudden he's thinking, hold on a minute, the creature's going to come and kill me, or he believes it's going to kill me. And as a woman at the time, we should protect women from seeing such violence, even though Elizabeth has already seen the murder of her, of William, her brother, the murder, the execution of Justine. So what Shelley could be trying to say here is that Elizabeth dies first of all, as a victim of the patriarchy. She's a victim of Victor's possession of her. That's enforced by their parents as well. She's murdered by the creature, a kind of a male character. But also, she's doubly the victim because society's standards, what was expected of women, this idea that they shouldn't see combat, they'll be afraid here, which completely patronises Elizabeth as a female character. Shelley could be trying to say here that actually in society, if we uphold women to these double standards of we expect them to be dutiful and kind of, not look at things that are too kind of afraid and scary, actually this leads directly to her death because Victor deserts her completely because he still believes that he is going to be the one that's murdered. And suddenly I hear a shrill and dreadful scream. It came from the room which Elizabeth had retired, and Elizabeth is murdered. Elizabeth is murdered by the creature. And the creature appears at the window with a grin on the face of the monster. He seemed to jeer as with his fiendish finger he pointed towards the corpse of my wife. The grin. We've mentioned the grin a couple of times. The grin when he was born. We've seen the grin earlier on when the female creature was to be created. And we talk about those grins as grins of happiness. It's interesting that Shelley deliberately chooses the word grin rather than smile for its ambiguous meaning. Smile is synonymous with happiness. We think people smile when they are happy. But a grin, you can grin when you are happy, but you can also grin when you are gloating or you're boasting about something. And here, this grin has changed from happy creature when he's first born, seeing his father, from happy creature when he sees his future wife being created. This grin is now, this is sneering, this is mocking Victor, and he will continue to mock Victor for the next couple of chapters in the novel as well. He jeered as well with his fiendish finger he pointed towards the corpse of my wife. And it's interesting that she's murdered on their wedding night because this does a couple of things. First of all, the female creature was destroyed on the night that the creature and the female creature would have been kind of united. But secondly, by murdering Elizabeth or having Elizabeth murdered on the wedding night, what Shelley's doing there is that this moment is quite important from Shelley. Victor never gets a chance to consummate his marriage. For a marriage to be legally binding in this country, you need to have a civil ceremony and you need to consummate the marriage. You need to have sex with the partner to consummate that marriage and make it legally binding. It's a requirement of marriage to this day as well. And the creature murders Elizabeth before Victor ever gets that chance to consummate his marriage, before they ever get to have sex. They live in a religious society, they're a religious wealthy family, they wouldn't have had sex before marriage. So Shelley deliberately does this. She deliberately puts the murder of Elizabeth that evening on their wedding night so Victor can't consummate the marriage. And what that means is that although he believes he is married to Elizabeth, in law, their marriage is null and void. They're not married because it's a requirement to consummate that marriage. And so what the creature has done here, I will be with you on your wedding night, the threat all along, the reason he's going to get Elizabeth on their wedding night is because he destroys Victor's marriage. So Victor is now the exact same status of the creature. His family are starting to kind of, fall. There's only Alphonse and Ernest left really, and he is as married as the creature is because his marriage is now completely null and void as well. And it's a very dark, very calculated form of revenge, which suggests the creature is very intelligent but also very capable of playing with kind of standards in society as well. Victor goes to hunt down the creature then, and on the next page, Alphonse Frankenstein dies as well of the misery of what's happened. He died in Victor's arm. Interestingly, Ernest Frankenstein is Victor's surviving brother. You don't really get any marks for this, but we don't really know what happens to him. Shelley kind of forgets about him. He's mentioned here, and then we don't really know what happens to him much after this. It's unlikely you'd ever get a question on him, and again, it's just a kind of a moot point really as we're discussing, but let's assume that Ernest dies as well, to kind of cap off that tragic element of a character of high status, classic tragedy, a character of high status with a fatal flaw leading to the death of that character and everyone around them, which is certainly what happens by the end of Frankenstein. Victor then talks to a local magistrate. So we're back in kind of Switzerland. We're back in kind of France, Switzerland here. He talks to a local magistrate, and they say, "Look, this is what's happened." The magistrate has seen or heard the death of Elizabeth, so they vow to investigate it. But the magistrate says, "Look, I believe what you're saying, but I fear from what you've described yourself to be his properties, this will prove impracticable. And thus, while every proper measure is pursued, you should make up your mind to disappointment. That cannot be." Victor is delusional throughout the novel for many reasons. But one of the main things he's delusional is the creature is physically stronger than he will ever be, and mentally stronger than he will ever be as well. And he vows to kill the creature. And the magistrate's saying here, look, if you've said that he can survive cold, he's physically strong, then I suppose what Victor's done is he's created the perfect creature because it's stronger than mankind. But he's created that monster, and now that monster is kind of running amok. It can't really be stopped because it's stronger than anything mankind can do. And Victor then vows to kind of get revenge, and we're on chapter 24. So what then happens really is a merry dance around the kind of the northern Europe into the North Pole here really, and he kind of leads Victor on. He leads Victor on a kind of a bit of a dance really. He makes him suffer, so his family are all dead like the creatures, and now he's going to lead him to his death as well, and it's going to be a slow and miserable and painful death. Sometimes indeed he left marks. We're on page 156. In writing on the barks of the trees or cut in stone, my reign is not yet over. Follow me, I seek the everlasting ices of the north, where you will feel the misery of cold and frost to which I am impassive. You will find near this place, if you follow not too tardily, a dead hare, eat and be refreshed. The creature is wicked beyond. He is the wretch that he's been. The self-fulfilling prophecy has come true. He's the wretch that he has been told to become, because what he's doing here, in the same way we see in the animal kingdom, a more powerful predator will toy with its prey sometimes. Sometimes if you watch a cat with a mouse, sometimes they play with. They know they're going to kill the prey eventually, so they just toy with it. They prolong its life just for their entertainment. And that's quite a dark and evil thing to do, but it's exactly what the creature's doing here to Victor. Come on, my enemy. Many hard and miserable hours must you endure until that period shall arrive. So if the creature was morally good earlier on in the novel, that's certainly gone completely. And I suppose the question we ask ourselves is, how justified is he in his revenge against Victor? This behaviour is evil, but he has suffered evil as well. And so they continue further on up until the North Pole. And then we get to page 159, which is basically where Victor's narrative ends. And we're kind of up to date now. So they've led up to the North Pole. And of course, this part goes right back to the start of the novel, where Victor was seen by Walton and the crew kind of on a sled with kind of no dogs around him, washing up on a kind of a raft of ice against the kind of the stranded ship here. So we've now gone full circle, and we're now back to the kind of the start of the novel. And Victor has told his story up to the kind of the present day. And so Walton takes over, and it's interesting that Walton takes back over here. You can consider this part of chapter 24. We also call it about Walton in continuation. This is as important as any other part of the novel. Walton's letters are at the start, and Walton comes back at the end as a frame narrative. First of all, it's an interesting device by Shelley to deliberately kind of add a sense of credibility, a veneer of credibility to the events we've seen, because it's a pretty incredible story. So we need kind of Walton almost to corroborate what Victor's said. We need almost Walton to see the creature to make it seem real. And of course, we know it's not real, we know it's a work of fiction. But as a reader reading this, if we've got two kind of characters, then it's going, oh, hold on a minute, this could be true, this could happen here. And that's how the sense of fear works in the novel. Walton then reads this story as well, and he kind of reflects back on this story, and kind of this is towards the end of Victor's life now as well. Victor kind of feels miserable. When younger, I believed myself destined for some great enterprise. So he thought he was capable of greatness, but like the archangel who aspired to omnipotence, I'm chained in an eternal hell. This idea is mentioned in quite a lot of literature. We've seen Paradise Lost, this idea of Lucifer, who was an angel, who was evil, and then is kind of sent of Frankenstein is subtitled The Modern Prometheus. And the story of Prometheus, of course, the god who wanted to take the fire of all the gods to create life, and to have that power, and as punishment was chained to a rock, and he had his liver pecked out every day for the rest of eternity. You know, quite a pretty graphic punishment. So this refers to Prometheus, but also you've got this idea of Paradise Lost as well. You know, we see it in other stories as well. You've got the kind of flight of Icarus, who wanted to flies too close to the sun and dies and suffers as a result as well. And so this is played on a lot in literature, but this idea that Victor sees himself as being great, but actually he's now saying, look, you know, I'm chained in eternal hell. The price of my greatness, my powers of analysis and application were intense. He creates man, but he's now suffered as a result of that. And Walton is quite upset, really. Walton at the end of, you know, they're kind of he's also a foil for Victor in the same way that Clerval is. They're very similar, I suppose, in characteristics in the way that Clerval and Walton are. And Victor kind of says, look, you know, I can't take any more friends here because my family are dead, and you know, you can't live up to the emotions that I had with Clerval or Elizabeth. Walton then writes a second letter to his sister, but in this letter he's kind of worried. You know, what do you think of my story? But he's also worried about a mutiny caused by the fact that they're stuck in the ice here. The rations are starting to run out. The people, the crew on the ship are starting to die and suffer, and they're kind of fearing a mutiny. And a mutiny, of course, is when characters from a lower rank or people from a lower rank rise up against the people in charge of them. In school, for instance, a mutiny would be students uprising against their teachers, and here we've got the crew threatening a mutiny. And it's interesting that mutiny as an idea is something we've actually seen throughout Frankenstein. The creature, as a character of a lower social status, has risen up and punished the Frankenstein family of upper class status here. And Walton dreads this mutiny, and this mutiny is going to check his ambition because he wants to get to the North Pole. And he's kind of wondering, well, do I carry on at the risk of killing my crew and potentially myself, you know, and having innocent lives on my conscience, or do I turn back home as well? And his story parallels Victor's directly here, and this is another reason why he's included, because Victor carried on, and it's led to the death of others. So does Walton heed Victor's story? You know, should we be like Walton now and consider, well, you know, in our own lives, do we want to have ambition that is unchecked, that leads to potentially the misery of the people around us, or do we take into account their thoughts and feelings, and you're not just the people around us, other people in society? So Walton then talks about here the fears of a mutiny, and the mutiny kind of happens. People basically say, you know, if you're going to carry on, you know, we're going to have a mutiny and we will just leave you. And remember, of course, there's more crew members than there are Waltons at the moment. And Victor Frankenstein, who's almost dead here, you know, he's on his deathbed here. What do you mean? What do you demand of your captain here? Are you, you know, basically, are you going to give up on this brave mission? It's interesting because Victor is on his deathbed, and yet he hasn't learned his lesson. He's still saying, be men or be more than men. Quite a nice parallel to Macbeth that we study in year 11. You know, this idea of masculinity here. Be men or be more than men. He has never been a man in his life. Being a man is not just about doing what you want without unchecked behaviour. Mary Shelley herself has seen this through her father and her husband, you know, who do whatever they want without fear or care for their family or for other people in society. Being more than men, being a man is about taking responsibility for your actions. But Victor said, be steady to your purposes and firm as a rock. This ice is made, so basically, go to the North Pole. Even though you're all going to die, it doesn't matter, you know, be men, be more than men. And Shelley includes this to show that Victor's character has not developed from the very first page of the novel. Although he's kind of bemoaning the fact that he's chained in an eternal hell and his life is so terrible because of what's happened, it's entirely his fault that this has happened. Shelley presents this deliberately. His character does not change. It stays exactly the same throughout the novel, same sort of level. Unlike the creature, who we feel empathy for at the start because he is a victim of society's prejudice, he is neglected by his father, Victor Frankenstein is entirely the same throughout this. He doesn't change to his deathbed. And to be quite frank, he deserves everything that he gets as punishment for a scientist breaking natural law, as a man who does not act with empathy. And Shelley does this to illustrate, to make a point about those people in society, those upper class members of society who are so willing to do things and behave that in certain ways that benefit themselves, that they don't think about the common man. They don't think about the sailors on the ship or the creature or their family. And what's quite interesting here is Victor's speech. There's a lovely moment of dramatic irony, this quite passionate speech. You can imagine Victor lying there in the cold, suffering, and it does absolutely nothing, because the die is cast. I've consented to return if we're not destroyed. Victor's last moment speech, the crew, even Walton, sees through the stupidity of Victor's act. They've had this story about how man shouldn't overreach the potential of nature, how man should obey kind of God's laws, and yet the speaker of that speech, this great story, is now just sat there saying, look, carry on to your debts. And the men are like, no, I've consented to return if we are not destroyed. Victor falls flat on for any credit. He's at the end of his life, and he has no impact on anything else. But it's interesting that Walton is blasted by cowardice and indecision. He still views himself as a coward. So Walton, it's the crew really who make the decision, the lower classes rather than the upper class, who views it still as cowardice, but he has no choice, because if his crew mutiny, they'll just throw him out on the ice and take the ship back home. So Walton returns to England. Victor then says, look, I can't, I'm vowing to stay here. I've made a vow to get revenge, and talks about the death of the creature. But Victor also says the task of his destruction was mine. Remember his speech here, be men or be more than men. The task of his destruction is mine. When actuated by selfish and vicious motives, have I asked you to undertake my unfinished work, and I renew this request now. What Victor's saying there is, look, I've asked you actually earlier on, if something happens to me, would you mind killing the creature for me? Bear in mind that the murder of the creature is impossible, given how physically strong he is. Bear in mind that Victor is on his deathbed, and it is Victor's destiny to kill the creature. And bear in mind that Victor has just told people to be a man, be a man. Part of being a man is taking responsibility. Victor's not taking responsibility here. He's still continuing to be selfish. That's the key word for Victor. Why he's selfish, we can look at that in many different ways, but he is selfish. He is self-obsessed and self-absorbed to the point that he's saying, look, I might not actually get to kill the creature. And he's so selfish that he's going to make this person who he's not even willing to call a friend, he's going to use Walton to potentially kill the creature for him as well. And then here, about half an hour afterwards, he attempted again to speak but was unable. He pressed my hand feebly and his eyes closed forever. So Victor dies on page 166. And the creature comes to see Walton. The creature is gigantic in stature, uncouth and distorted in its proportions. And of course he talks, never did I behold a vision so horrible as his face, of such loathsome yet appalling hideousness. So Walton is kind of disgusted by the creature's appearance, is the same way that every other person in humanity has treated the creature. And Walton talks to the creature about, the creature says, that is also my victim. In his murder, my crimes are consummated. The miserable series of my being is wound to its close. Basically, the creature has nothing yet left to live for, because his life's purpose now, as a result of Victor's actions, is complete. And Walton kind of remonstrates with him, look, you're lying, you're kidding yourself. But the creature responds to Walton, still referred to as a demon in Walton's narrative, so still judged. Do you think I was dead to agony and remorse? My heart was fashioned to be susceptible of love and sympathy. He was a good person. I was born to be capable of love and sympathy, and he is. But when wrenched by misery, wrenched, that violent verb, when his heart is almost torn out of his chest by what has happened, by vice and hatred, it did not endure the violence of the change without torture such as you cannot even imagine. And that's a good point. We might be willing to, we can't forgive what the creature's done, but we might be willing to understand that. But also, the idea of murder, the idea of infanticide, the murder of William, the murder of an innocent woman in Elizabeth, the framing of Justine, the murder of Clerval, heartbroken and overcome. You can legally judge people. You can give the creature a custodial sentence. The creature can condemn himself to death, as he does in the next couple of pages. but you can't free the mental state of those crimes, the trauma of those crimes, and those kind of moments that the creatures had to endure. And this does have an impact. I was at first touched by the expressions of his misery. So Clerval is there's an impact on Clerval there. And they discuss this, they kind of go back and forwards this here. And the creature refers to himself as the fallen angel becomes a malignant devil. We've seen Victor refer to himself earlier on, just flicking back through, as the archangel who aspired to omnipotence. I'm chained in eternal hell. And it's interesting, they both refer to themselves as the kind of the fallen angel really here. But it's the creature we perhaps empathise with more as the fallen angel. Because he has little say in this. He's a malignant devil, he's an evil devil. He is an evil devil, but he's also the fallen angel. He was never given a chance by society, and he's desolate. I have murdered the lovely and the helpless. I have strangled the innocent as they slept, and grasped to death his throat who never injured me or any living thing. The creature does something that Victor never does here. He takes responsibility. He openly declares his crimes to Walton as a witness. In the same way, I suppose, in the Catholic faith, people make confession, and often people before death, as the creature is here, we're kind of very close to the end of the novel, will confess their sins, or they will seek absolution of their sins before death as well. And the creature is doing that here as well. He is saying, look, I have committed these acts. You hate me, but your abhorrence cannot equal that with which I regard myself. And it's an interesting point. The creature's sense of self-loathing is higher than that which humanity will ever kind of look at him as well. And the creature says he will burn his body. He'll create a funeral pyre and burn his body as well. But he talks here, there's a kind of a moment here. Some years ago, when the images which this world first affords opened upon me, when I felt the cheering warmth of summer and heard the rustling of the leaves and the warbling of the birds, and these were all to me, I should have wept to die. There's a flashback really to his early life here, and how when he was alone with nature, these things brought him such pleasure that he would have wept to die. Now death is his only consolation. But also there's this kind of potential vision of the afterlife, of what will face the creature in death. He won't go to heaven, I suppose, but this offers him some kind of comfort. Polluted by crimes. It's interesting that this natural imagery is polluted in the same way that the creature as a metaphor for nature is polluted too. And he says he will go. He jumps out the window, and upon the ice raft which lay close to the vessel, he was soon borne away by the waves and lost in darkness and distance. The ending of the novel by Shelley is another deliberate device. Please and make promises that he hasn't kept. The creature isn't entirely innocent, and he certainly isn't entirely empathetic. And so he says that he will exult in the agony of the torturing flames. He says he will burn himself to death, basically. In a lot of the film versions, you will see this, but we don't see it happen in the novel. He was borne away by the waves and lost in darkness and distance. So he could go through with what he plans, but we never see this. Shelley deliberately ends the novel before this for a couple of reasons. First of all, in terms of being a gothic horror story, as the novel is, it ends with this murderous character at large. He said he's going to die, but he's lied before in the novel. He's murdered women and children, and now he is at large. And he's lost in darkness and in distance as well. So you can take this one of two ways, and this is why it can be quite difficult sometimes, Frankenstein. He does say he will kill himself, but also he's lost in darkness and distance, so it never happens. Some of the language here as well. He was borne away by the waves, lost in darkness and in distance. You could argue he's been lost in darkness and in distance from the very start of the novel and his inception. He was lost in darkness, the darkness of his soul. This idea of the competing goodness and darkness, the kind of the love and sympathy that are part of his character, but the misery that kind of takes over and makes him a fiend as well here. So darkness has won here. He's lost in darkness, and the darkness is a metaphor for the evil acts that he's committed and the evil, the kind of the fallen, the malignant devil that he's now become. And distance, you could argue he was always lost in distance from his creator throughout the novel, as a kind of a lost child there, a helpless lost child, but also his distance from humanity. No one comes to save him. He receives no comfort from any human being throughout the novel. And potentially, there's many reasons this, there's many kind of theories, many points of context or ideas to explore. But Shelley herself, is she lost in darkness and distance as well? The distance from those close to her, her father, Percy Shelley, her husband as well, and their relationship. Can we take this novel as a metaphor for her life? Is it a metaphor for science and kind of, this idea, we have this phrase, don't we, in modern English, of creating a monster, and that means that you create something that's bad initially, but it gets worse and worse and worse and worse and more powerful. And there's lots of kind of themes and ideas in Frankenstein, but this is a nice quotation. The last line of the novel is a great quotation to learn and use within your analysis as well. And we will look at how to create an essay plan and analyse in future videos.